The cost of energy storage devices, especially lithium, will decrease as we learn how to build them more efficiently, high quality, and we get the volume up. And so I do agree that it is time to begin thinking about how do we learn how to manufacture lithium-ion batteries, learn how to do it now at low volume, and then begin moving that volume up so that we can get the quality up and the cost down.
Well, the automobile industry practically invented high-volume manufacturing. Why is the federal government needed to accelerate industrialization in this area? And what can DOE do that the industry cannot do? Both of you, either of you.
Okay. Well, actually, I came with a whole list of specific projects that I would go and talk to my friends at DOE about relative to high-volume manufacturing. We are presently completing the construction of our first lithium-ion facility in Nersac, France. I wish I could say it was Nersac, Maryland or something. And one of the things that we're learning is that we have good capability to produce good quality hybrid cells, but it is not at the level that we need to be producing them in the quantities and at the cost levels that you do for cell phones and for laptop computers. We know very well the kind of help that we need help from the government labs, DOE, and other federal resources. And I'd be delighted to share those specific projects with you that would indeed enable us here in the United States to be able to get a leg up on the high volume manufacturing at affordable costs.
Okay. To drive down cost and to spur development of advanced batteries in the U.S., you propose a partnership, Ms. Wright, between federal agencies and the battery manufacturers and lower tier suppliers. Let me ask you three questions. Do these partnerships not already exist in the form of groups like the U.S. Advanced Battery Coalition? Does the DOE partner directly with the battery manufacturers and lower tier suppliers in R&D projects, or is it mostly conducted through partnerships with automobile manufacturers? Third, is there a need for diversifying the pool of participants in federal vehicle-related R&D?
Clearly we do have partnerships that are established, and they're good partnerships through DOE funding, USABC, Freedom Card. Those are all great forums. But I would suggest to you that what we need now is to really look at it in two pieces in terms of improving our partnership. One is being able to take the technology that, as Denise said, is ready to go forward and be commercialized in high volumes at affordable costs, and support that as an industry with the automotive manufacturers, the battery suppliers, and the federal governments, including the labs, who can help us with the intellectual property generation, and get those into demonstration fleets to absolutely build the confidence and the capability to do it on a high volume. The second piece, and this is where I don't think that we have the emphasis that we need, that is the what comes next. We tend to focus too much on getting through a specific project rather than we'll solve this, but what's going to come after that? Because I assure you, everybody else in the world is already thinking about that. And I think in terms of the partnerships really are through the USABC in terms of our day-to-day interaction. So the direct work really comes through USABC at the direction of DOE. I would encourage more direct interaction between DOE, the automotive manufacturers, the industry, as well as the suppliers. And then finally, I think you had a question on diversification of who should be involved. I wrote as fast as I could. I talk faster than I can write.
Diversifying the pool of participants in vehicle-related R&D.
I think we actually are in fairly good shape relative to who's participating in these, in these established forums. And I think clearly, if you take a look at how the automotive manufacturers are partnering up, they're taking advantage of everything that's available to them. Unfortunately, there's only a few of us that are here based in the United States.
If I could add in that area as well, I think USABC, DOE has done an excellent job thus far getting us where we are, but our product is still high cost. Our product still doesn't have the quality it needs to go. We need to take a step change. We need to take a step change in allowing us to understand more apparently how these applications are going to work, learning cycles. We can stay in the research, we can stay in the what-if kind of mode for a while, but in order to really get to a commercialization of where this has to go, you've got to have demonstrations, you've got to put the product, you got to manufacture the product, and you got to have exercising activities from a learning perspective. And the cost of these energy storage systems, these batteries, are high in the beginning, and you've got to have means by which you get some quick learning cycles, and then you've got to have a means for the customer to be able to buy these kinds of things. So they got to have some incentives to bring it down so the customers don't assume all the cost, but then rapidly, at the same very time, you've got to build up your manufacturing capability in the States in order to continue and sustain that cost curve. Because if you don't do that, you'll end up having one system that works, and all of a sudden it's gone away and technology has passed you up.
I'll call on Mr. Inglis, and then I'll come back and ask a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here at the Science Committee, and you know we're very excited about science. It's also true that it can be a science project until the market sort of drives things along. And so the goal being to break our dependence on foreign oil, the goal being to create jobs by inventing new technologies, and the goal being to clean up the air. I think it's very helpful testimony you're giving because it is about the market. And so, Ms. Gray, maybe you could talk a little bit about General Motors' hope of either. Is it hydrogen or is it Volt, or is it? It doesn't matter. Either one works for General Motors. As a manufacturer here, what do you see as the market's acceptance of those, and help us move from a science project into something that's really going to transform the fleet?
You know, when we put out the Chevy Volt earlier this year, I think that was a means to bring these kinds of things together. Because number one, we've got a battery, a high voltage storage device that allows you to mate that up with an internal combustion engine. So when the battery gets depleted, you can use the internal combustion engine in order to replenish the battery. But you can also use a fuel cell in that same configuration, if you will, in order to provide power, if you will, energy for that battery to store it and to use it appropriately. It really was a way that we pulled all of these technologies together. So it's not a either or, but an and, in order to allow us to have the diversification, if you will, from petroleum. So really there's a place for both of them depending upon the needs and the use and the accessibility of the various energy devices.
Well, that said, capital is generally limited. In other words, you got to allocate resources within a company, or so. You think you'll be allocating them where you think you'll be allocating them? Don't tell me anything. You got to shoot me after you tell me or anything, or call the SEC lawyers if you got to say something. If you got to before you answer. But I guess it's a public forum, so you can probably tell me.
Allocation of resources have been applied for both areas, quite frankly, and for all the areas. I was telling one of the constituents a little while ago, back in the late 90s, I worked on ethanol. Currently, I'm working on energy storage devices in fuel cells, and I'm coming up with requirements for fuel cell vehicles with an energy storage device, and I'm also coming up with requirements for an internal combustion engine, again, to replenish the battery when needed. So we have resources allocated in all of those areas. I was also trying to advertise that we're still hiring, because for some reason people think that we're not adding resources in these particular areas, but that's so incorrect. We've been hiring over the last 10 years in areas that allow us to increase our fuel economy through regular conventional vehicle efficiencies, as well as diversification, be it biofuels, fuel cells, energy storage devices. If you looked at where GM's been hiring, if you will, over the last 10 years, it's been in those areas so that we can meet the need of where we have to go. So the answer is all of the above.
So, Ms. Wright, you got a prediction about which one's going to win?
Well, I was going to ask you if I could make a comment
Yeah.
if you didn't invite me. I think it's really important for everybody to understand that, one is a journey, so you're going to learn and we're going to increase hybridization, increase electrification, and there's going to come a point where it's not going to matter what is actually providing the fuel. You will always, always, always have an energy storage device. So I'm employable for a long time because you're always going to need an energy storage device. Now, what shape and form it takes, what the chemistry is, who knows? What's really exciting about that, though, is we are done, and I used to be called a science project at Ford with my with the hybrids and with the fuel cells, is we're now seeing a convergence in exactly what GM is doing, and that is, regardless of what the power plant that Denise is told to provide an energy storage for, she doesn't care. She's going to be able to provide an energy storage device that will fuel anything. And so as we get better and smarter with ethanol and internal combustion engines and diesels and fuel cells and pure electrification, it's all going to be a journey that we're going to drive standards, drive the cost down, and eventually we'll have a whole portfolio of stuff that we'll be able to. So I didn't answer your question. I'd be a good politician, wouldn't I? So I don't think there is a winner. I think the winner is the battery, clearly.
That is helpful. Now, I have heard from some people that see hydrogen as the future, that hydrogen or an electric, a pure electric, would be far more simple to manufacture and to operate than a hybrid. I've heard the objection to hybrids that they are actually very complicated systems. In fact, I've seen it laid out how many pieces are in a hybrid as opposed to how many pieces would be in a fuel cell vehicle. And it's really an interesting layout. And the idea being, you put all that complexity in a vehicle and you drive it a couple 100,000 miles, a lot of those things are going to break. And so the simpler the better, right? So I agree that you got to have a storage mechanism, but you want to get it as simple as possible, right? And cut out that some part of that so you can get to simplicity.
Well, I do agree with you. And if you take a look at the complexity of a hybrid system, you have essentially 9 intelligent systems that are all trying to play nicely in the sandbox, right, and operate as a cohesive system. But what you have to take, and this is where we get into Linda's expertise, is you're right. Denise said EVs are inherently more simple. But then you have to take a look at the total picture, and that is, how clean is the energy source for which you're driving that electric vehicle? I mean, so we get outside of the fundamental technology of the vehicle, and then you have to start looking at it more globally. So I would suggest to you that, yeah, we want to drive to electrification of vehicles, and with or without a fuel cell. We can debate that, but I do think then we have to expand and say, how are we going to ensure that the energy sources aren't worse than the cure of those vehicles for which we're propelling them?
You want to add something to that, Ms. Ziegler?
Yes, I just did want to add the study that was done by EPRI and NRDC, and they looked specifically at plug-in hybrids. In all scenarios, even with the current mix of generation, which doesn't include any coal gasification or anything like that, there was greenhouse gas benefits in all cases. And then if you look at, as the electricity industry moves to lower carbon generation, you get much more greenhouse gas savings. So even with, and this was study on the plug-in hybrids, not pure electric vehicles, but in all cases with the current mix of generation, there was benefits for greenhouse gas.
The only comment I like to make, if I may, as we talked about simplicity, I agree that as we move towards our Chevy Volt, for example, our E-Flex system, it does get more simpler when it comes to the control system, but we need the technology breakthroughs in order to realize that simplicity. And that's why we have to keep focused on ensuring that we've got that technology breakthrough in our advanced battery technology area. So I like the end game, but we've got to make sure that we make the appropriate steps as we move forward, and providing some additional support in the advancement of batteries will allow us to get to that very more simplistic end game.
Ms. Ziegler, Southern California Edison is leading the charge to develop plug-in hybrid vehicles, and you've signed some important partnerships in this area with companies like Ford and Johnson Controls. Other than signing memorandums of understanding with car companies and battery manufacturers, what are the next steps in using these partnerships to advance technologies?
I think what we will get out of these partnerships is exactly what my two colleagues were talking about, which is getting vehicles tested with real people out in real circumstances. So when we get the Ford vehicles delivered to us, we will put them in our fleet, we will put them out with some customers, and we will test them in real circumstances, looking at the recharging cycles and the discharge. So the benefit of that is getting cars in the fleet, getting them tested. The other things that we're working on is, and you've heard talk today about the smart grid of the future, is looking at what are the kinds of standards and controls that you're going to want to have. When we talk about that the electricity grid can charge most of these vehicles, you need to charge them off-peak. We have excess capacity on the grid for California. That's typically at night. So what you want to have is the intelligence either in the car, in the smart meter, or in the grid that can tell the car that you only wanted to charge at night. So another benefit of these partnerships is really looking at what are the kinds of standards and controls that we need to develop between all of the industries to make that happen and use the electric grid to the benefit, as opposed to just adding more on-peak load by charging the vehicles.
What's the timeline to do something? To do that?
The timeline for the first, which is the demonstration, we will get some vehicles next year and begin demonstrating those. I hesitate to speculate on the timeline for the smart grid. I think we are experimenting now with one circuit, which we call our Avanti circuit, which is a test of a smart grid. And so we need to test that and see the results. And then you're looking at a huge infrastructure across the United States. So to replace that infrastructure with a smart grid technology is at least a couple decades, I would think, if not more, to really replace all of the electric grid with smart grid capability.
All of you to comment on. We talk about the importance of building up a domestic manufacturing base for an advanced battery industry, but what does this really mean for your respective sectors and the United States as a whole? Why should domestic auto manufacturers not outsource this part of the industry to Asia, supply cheap components from an established battery sector?
If I could start.
Please.
Every single program that we have, we made up with a supplier. And there's learnings that happen. And that learning on how does the customer use their vehicle, and as every one of us are in here, there are those many different means by which a person drives a vehicle. And that learning loop is so important in how we characterize it, how we standardize those driving operations, and then give that to a supplier to make your system. They are learning from you. And every time they do that, they're getting better and better at doing that. If we do that with all of our non-domestic companies, they become smart. They will stay smart, and we will continue to send information that way. I think it's very important that we establish within our own country that learning opportunity. The learning opportunity to make energy storage devices, the technology to build the manufacturing tools. There's tool makers out there that are all outside of the United States. There are chemists, there are companies that make all kinds of powders and things like that for energy storage devices that are all outside of the United States. If we don't retain that knowledge here, every single vehicle that we build, all the knowledge on how we operate and how we advance that technology goes away and does not stay here in the United States. So I think it's extremely important that we establish that capability, that competence here in the States so that we can retain that knowledge, so that we can have jobs here for our folks, and we begin being, if you will, sending information or sending parts the other way. So it's extremely important that we, as OEMs, partner up with companies and have the ability to have that knowledge here, and we can only get it by increasing our focus on manufacturing of energy storage devices, high-tech systems here in the States, because it is an art and it's also a science.
In terms of, let's talk about hybrids first. The market is, and it's going to continue to stay here in the United States. We are the largest consumers of hybrid vehicles in the world, and it's projected that we're going to continue to be doing that. So if you start with that premise, it seems to make sense that you want to create the jobs here where you're going to be selling them. We can assemble them here, we can manufacture them here, and we can sell them here. I would also let you know that hybrid vehicle technology originated here in the United States. And if you take a look at what happened, we're absolutely getting decimated in the marketplace with technology that we invented here. And I'm not going to repeat what Denise said, but I think she summed it up exactly right. We have an opportunity here to take advantage of a market that wants hybrids and will accept them with some help from the government, of course. We can create jobs. We can create the infrastructure. We can pull through our universities and through our schools a desire and a sexiness for kids to embrace science and technology instead of becoming day traders. We can then become exactly what we're seeing happen everywhere else in the world, where we have to go and export. And from a purely practical standpoint, every time we do a hybrid vehicle right now, we have to go to Japan, China, or Europe to get all of our components. It takes a lot longer for us to get a vehicle on the road if we're all traveling all over the world to get these components, engineered and manufactured.
So what's the state of the
And it
development
costs.
of a domestic supply chain for the battery
We don't have
manufacturing
one.
Period.
We don't have one. And I don't think you know this, but the facility that I have in Milwaukee, the Johnson Controls facility, is the only facility outside of Japan that has complete capability to do cell research, cell prototype manufacturing, and systems engineering. It is the only one outside of Asia. That's a real commentary on what's happened to our ability to not only have the basic science, but the capability to produce. We do not have a single supplier here in the United States.
Ms. Ziegler, would you like to comment?
I would just add one thing. I think, as we talked about earlier, we are looking at plug-in hybrids in this technology to really get ourselves off of imported oil. So doesn't it make sense to try to use United States manufacturers to make the replacement for imported oil? And I would really echo as well, we as the United States really need to have good jobs for our people that provide good wages. And I think being able to manufacture technology in the United States is critically important.
What are other countries doing to increase their own capabilities? As we perhaps develop that, they'll stay competitive. What kind of comment would you have about that?
Well, I think it starts first in the structure of the society. If you take a look anywhere but in the United States, they encourage science and technology in the school systems. They're supported from a government level, the industries as well as the universities, to advance their technology. So I think there just starts a fundamental infrastructure inside of these countries that we just don't have here to encourage building up that capability. And if you take a look at what's happening, let's just use Europe as an example. They have a plethora of activity going on, not only in diesels, but in hybrids, because they know for the 2012 Kyoto Protocol, diesels alone are not going to get them to the levels that they need to be at. So what they're going to do is, and we'll produce the batteries, sell the vehicles over here, we'll make sure that it's accepted, and we'll get the technology, and they're going to take it back over there. So that's what's happening in the world right now.
Just to add another comment, I think we need to a more focused effort between government and industry here in the United States in order to advance that technology. You're absolutely right. We have efforts in place, DOE, USABC, we've been doing some things thus far, but if we're gonna stay in this league, we're gonna have to make a step change in our efforts, in our funding efforts, in our focus efforts, as we, industry, come together. And it's amazing how GM has a collaboration with Ford and Chrysler. from USABC. We also have collaborations with BMW as well as DCX, because the answer is everybody sees this is where we have to do. We have to advance the technology in this area, and collaborations are occurring. I think we, from a government perspective, we need to step up our game in that area as well. Japan has a huge step up in this, where they've combined very effectively their government, their industry, as well as their universities in developing not just nickel metal hydride, but also lithium and the next generation lithium. Because the answer isn't just with one. You've got to have that business plan to allow you to continue to sustain that, to understand what the next one is and the next one is in order to bring the cost down. Because if you stay in the startup mode, which I feel we are in at this point from a U.S. government, from an industry, we're still at that very infancy of being able to bring advanced battery technology to fruition. If we just stay there, the cost will never be there, and we'll be left behind, because we'll kind of stay in that do loop of trying to continue to do the research, but really not get the learning cycles, the quick learning cycles, put it in vehicles, put it in demonstration vehicles where we can learn, because like I said, every one of us drive differently. There are things that we know today, and there's things yet to be learned tomorrow, but if we don't have those demonstration opportunities, we won't learn them. And then again, the cost is going to be high in the beginning, and collectively with government, we're going to have to lower that so that we can get more product out there in the real consumer's hands, so that we can learn more and then bring those costs down.
Inglis, I have well overstayed my welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that I'll use all the 5 minutes, but here's the, if I wanted to go from here to buy a plug-in hybrid, can I get one? Who would I call? Who would I call?
You can't get one from an OEM today that has been completely integrated, that's been completely tested, that will last the expectation 10 years. You won't have to service it. We're not ready yet. There's still a lot of work to be done. You can buy demonstration kinds of things where it's in there, it won't last forever, but yet it allows you to have some demonstration opportunities.
So I could get a kit, right, for a Prius. I guess I can buy that. I could go online and find a kit.
Well, I'm not advertising.
I'll take care of that one, Denise, or it's not even associated. Yes, there are what we call garage conversions. Mm-hmm. I would just caution you, however, if you're personally thinking about doing that, one, you invalidate your automotive warranty.
Oh, yeah.
And number two, Denise is absolutely right. The standards and the validation that we have to undergo as an industry are beyond anything anybody, except if you're in that industry, understands. And so these conversions are not intended to meet those validation, those useful life, those reliability, and potentially unintended consequences. So I would just encourage you to wait, because she's going to be out very soon with one.
So we'll be soon.
Yeah, we're currently working on a plug-in hybrid right now for Saturn View. Johnson Controls staff is one of the advanced technology suppliers that we're working collectively on. But we've got to make sure that under all kinds of conditions, this vehicle is safe. In a crash condition, that the occupant is not hurt. We've got to make sure that it live and last. You don't want to go and replace your battery every 600 miles because it failed. So we are working towards coming up with a real certified plug-in vehicle that will allow us to, again, sell it to the customer, and it meets your needs.
And when's the projected delivery?
We haven't put a production date on that we can announce to the public, although internally I got a production date that I've got to make sure that I line everything up and work as hard as I possibly can to uncover and to deal with all of those engineering issues in order to make this program feasible.
You encourage me that it's engineering, it's standards, it's not the price of gasoline. Is that right? Or is it also some concern about whether the price of gasoline goes down, and when it goes down, do I really want to buy one, or do I just decide I'll keep on driving what I got?
As an OEM, I wish I can predict which vehicles you'll buy and at what price you'll buy them. I can't do that. But my obligation is to get the technology out there certified so that you can have the opportunity in order to accomplish that.
And you know what we have to do is, in absence of mandates, we have to drive the market pull. And I think Denise said it very well, that it is going to be a collaboration. We have to have continued improved collaboration with government. The vision is at some point, hopefully in the next couple of years, you're going to go to the dealership, and when you choose whether you want leather or your recyclable seats, you can then check off a plug-in option or another hybrid option, and it will be some reasonable incremental cost that you see the value being there, and that Denise and my industry can have a profitable growth plan. That is what we're working towards, but we can't do it at the volumes we're at now, the lack of standards, and the lack of real collaboration in terms of driving scale and infrastructure here in the United States.
Yeah, so if we really want to drive this, mandates may be a good idea, huh? In other words, fuel efficiency standards might be a good idea.
You can address it in a number of ways. It can be fuel efficiency, or I would certainly the shift in discussion to carbon mandates.
Yeah, which is helpful on your chart, that you had both of those, either carbon kind of systems or a fuel efficiency standard. I mean, it's a good argument that perhaps that might really get us going, huh?
Without a doubt, and what you saw in that chart represented CO2. When you add in all the other forms of greenhouse gases, it only gets better as you increase your level of hybridization. And so, just to refresh your memory, I would very much encourage that we continue to exploit the technology that we have available today, that we can put on the road today, but we're not in the volumes, as well as continue to invest in what is hopefully going to be near-term plug-in capability and eventually EV.
Great. And one last question. I guess my time, I have used all the time, Mr. Chairman, is we've got enough raw materials to do these batteries, right? It's not like that they're made out of platinum and there's only so much in the world, and that means that we really can't use these, or it's not a resource problem, right?
That's correct.
There's enough lithium, there's enough whatever else.
We can't divulge the recipes because that is our intellectual,
right,
property. But clearly the materials are always a concern. But versus, as Denise said, when you look at nickel metal hydride versus a lithium ion, first because it's 50% lighter, you're consuming less materials. And one of the areas that I would encourage additional research beyond where we are today is alternate materials that take all the variability in terms of market spikes as well as availability, and they're on the horizon, and we're working with them. So we're going to continue to experiment with our recipes to ensure that we meet all of the requirements from our automotive manufacturers. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to take that volatility out and still deliver all the performance.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. I'd like to go another 20 minutes. Afternoon. It's fascinating, and y'all have been great. Thank you very, very much. So we appreciate your appearing before our subcommittee, and under the rules of this committee, the record will be held open for 2 weeks for members to submit additional statements, and any additional questions that they might have for the witnesses, we'll send them to you. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.